All right, welcome to another Tag Talks. I'm Brigadier General Greg Johnson, Tag 63, your Adjutant General. And today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the hats that I wear as the tag for the Army. And that hat is the CG of the Army Physical Disability Agency. So we're down here at JPSA, so on site, on location in San Antonio. With a couple of great folks from the PDA team, that Physical Disability Agency team. We have the fabulous Colonel Paul, who's our Senior Reserve Adjudicator, and we're going to get into what that means and what she does on a daily basis. But we're also with who I call the National Treasure, Lem Chance. Lem has been on this team for a few years, right, Lem? And you're gonna get into that.
Absolutely.
But he's a national treasure that will come out in the discussion we have today. So with that said, Colonel Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how you got to this PDA team.
Thank you, sir. As you said, I am Colonel Dawn Paul, and I am an Army reservist. I have been in the Army between active duty and reserves for, it'll be 27 years this May. And I have been fortunate enough to be here at the PDA since the fall of 2018 as a mobilized reservist. And actually, MedCom has supported me being here, so I am a medical provider. I'm by trade a 73 Alpha, licensed clinical social worker. So I feel that it's been very fortuitous that I've been here to be able to advocate not just for the Army, but for soldiers in this process. So that's about it. So
Yeah.
I'm thankful to be here, sir.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm thankful you're on the team. Let's pass it over to Lem. Lem.
Hey, sir, thanks for having and thanks for being here today for the TAG Talk podcast today. And again, Lem Chance, and I am the Chief for Disability Evaluation System Operations Division here at PDA. I've been affiliated with PDA since 2006, and prior to that, my experience was I helped to stand up the congressionally mandated combat-related special compensation program under the TAG. And at the time, CRSC was a part of the Physical Disability Agency. So a lot of evolution over the time since I've been here. So I've served in uniform as well as a civilian currently in my current role, sir.
Yeah, 2006. Well, okay, Lem. So then tell us what you're doing inside the PDA right now, and then Dawn, you can tag on here.
My role primarily, sir, is as the principal advisor to you as the commander on all matters dealing with the disability evaluation system for the Army. I provide that representation at key DoD and Army leader engagements to provide the DES subject matter expertise and look at all the operational issues that may impact the execution of this program, which was derived from policy. And some people tend to think that when we're talking about IDES, or the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, they think that that was through law. And actually, that was a part of DoD policy. So,
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Dawn, what do you do on a daily basis?
I am one of the senior adjudicators on the team, and basically, sir, what that means is I sit as an appellate level reviewer on FPEB appeal boards, which is our formal appeals. I do formal appeals on a daily basis, as well as I augment the physical evaluation board in formal boards weekly. So that means we sit on those virtual boards with the soldiers who are appealing their formal appeal boards. And so we sit those, and then also as part of the advisory staff for the agency, I work on with Mr. Chance and his team and all of the other sections of PDA, as well as all of our components. DoD, OSD, we work on policies that affect the IDES process, and just determine how we can help with the process to make it more efficient and better. So,
Yeah. No, and you guys are working all the time too to make things as efficient as possible. I know that. But let's kind of backtrack a little bit. Maybe explain what the primary role of the Army Physical Disability Agency is, and then we'll run into talk about the pieces of IDES, that Integrated Disability Evaluation System. So I'm throwing a lot of acronyms out. But let's kind of take it by the eaches. Maybe tell us what the primary role is.
Sure, sir. And actually, the primary role of our agency, the Physical Disability Agency, or PDA as it's more commonly known to a lot of folks in the DES community, is that we're responsible for making fitness determinations for service members whose careers are interrupted due to illness or injury, and they can't continue in their respective job skill, or MOS as we call it in the Army side, and for officers, their area of concentration. And so when their careers are interrupted, it's up to the Physical Evaluation Board, which is an element as part of PDA, to make the fitness determination. And so we are the Disability Separation Authority for the Secretary of the Army.
Yeah, okay. That's a pretty big responsibility.
Huge. 60% of the population.
Yeah, so, okay, what are the numbers involved? Maybe just run through some averages. What's the numbers that are totally involved in the process?
As far as the soldiers going through the process, very good question. So if you look at our total caseload, and people tend to think there's only one piece of what we do, but there's different types of cases that we are involved in that involve physical disability. So on average, we could receive anywhere from 20,000 cases a year.
Yeah.
And so part of it, I know we'll kind of get into some of that further discussion here, but one of the key components of our business, or core business if you will be those soldiers that are part of the integrated disability evaluation system. And that's about 15,000 cases for the agency.
Yeah, so there's a lot in play at any given time in a year.
Absolutely.
So let's talk through then what comprises that IDES, that integrated disability evaluation system, right? Because there's a couple of pieces. Lem, you can start, and then Don, you can jump in.
Okay, sir.
Or flip it the other way. Don,
I'll
you
actually
can
take
start,
this one, and then Lem can back me
Sure.
up if I miss anything. So basically, sir, the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, as we say, IDES, is actually a joint interagency system that was created by the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs to basically streamline the DES process, the Disability Evaluation System process. Now, there's sometimes a misconception that the DES or the IDES is just the Medical Evaluation Board phase, when in actuality there are 4 phases. So we have the Medical Evaluation Board phase, the Physical Evaluation Board phase, transition, and the VA benefits delivery phases. So within the Medical Evaluation Board stage, which is, people say the MEB or the MEB, that is, the oversight of the MEB is the Office of the Surgeon General for the Army, so OTSG. Right. They maintain oversight of that. So, but we all do work together. So for the Physical Evaluation Board, the oversight is managed by the Physical Disability Agency here in San Antonio, but you as our CG, sir. The transition phase is actually shared by all of the components, Compo 1, 2, and 3, and a big heavy lifter in that transition process is our Operations Division, which is run by Mr. Chance here at PDA. The transition is, then PDA Ops Division helps all of the transition centers to ensure that transition for our soldiers in the process is seamless. And then when we get into the integrated part of the IDES, the biggest part is that the VA has a part in the entire process at every stage or phase, as you want to call it. So on the MEB side, when we talk about the medical evaluation boards, the VA is involved with the claim development, as well as one of the biggest reasons that the IDES was created was to create one medical examination for DOD and VA, so that when the soldier is getting out, they don't have to deal with multiple examinations for their conditions. The VA works with the MEBs, and then once the MEB determines what conditions that are either claimed or referred, what conditions meet or fail retention standards, then it moves from the MEB to the PEB. And then on the PEB side, the Physical Evaluation Board determines the fitness for all of the conditions that are referred. So if the MEB says something, a condition fails retention standards, then the Army PEB says, okay, we're going to determine per your MOS or AOC what conditions are fit or unfit. And then at that time, if they're unfit, then the VA, from their medical examinations, applies the ratings, and then we take those ratings, issue a DA 199 to the soldier, and then the soldier either concurs or non-concurs. And then there are a lot of moving parts within that. Yeah. But if they concur, then it moves to transition phase, and then the Ops Division works with the transition centers in Transproc to issue those orders and move the soldier along. There are a lot of caveats to that. Obviously, we all know that in the DES there are a lot of nuances for whether a soldier appeals, and there are FPEB appeals, and there are other factors that go into that. The soldier can request a VAR, which is actually done in-house in PDA Ops Division. And those VARs are all done prior to the soldier going into their transition phase. The whole point of all of IDES is to ensure that the soldier and their family have a more seamless transition, so that when they either retire or separate, that they are receiving their DOD and VA benefits within 30 days of discharge. That's critical, and that is happening right now for the majority of cases. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing for us as an agency is
I think Lem just told me today it's like 22 days or something.
Yeah, they're-
Something close, right?
22 days by the VA, sir, absolutely.
when they're going through, when our soldiers are going through the DES process, it's working for the majority of cases. So we always have those outliers and we deal with those. But I think our goal is to take care of the soldiers and their family so that they feel good about this process, because sometimes it's not their choice to be in this process. So we want to make it as seamless as possible for them.
Yeah.
And the one thing I always say as a social worker, I tell people, call us. If you don't know, if you have questions, if you can't get a hold of your PEBLO, or if you can't get a hold of your company commander, call the agency. We're always willing to, if we don't know the answer, we will find who does. So I think that's the biggest piece of working together, and it is a fully integrated system.
Yeah, I know for me, it's watching this process and kind of, directing the basic intent of the tag, which is to take care of people. So how do we make this process as seamless as possible? How do we make this process as efficient as possible? And then, not complaining here, but we don't totally own the whole thing, but we're in the best position to kind of monitor and shape how all four of those phases kind of come together. So I definitely put a little bit of heat on you guys and gals, right, to make this as best an outcome for a soldier as possible through the process, and then as we work through the whatever the medical determination is, et cetera. The other thing we've done more recently, right, is tried to see if we can retain as many soldiers as we can in the Army, to help fill the ranks, of the Army. And I know we're making some progress there as well, but that's more recent. Okay, so 4 phases. I got that. The MEB phase, and that's at your local post, camp, or station, right? OTSG has oversight and leads sled dog action for that. And then you got the PEB, which is really all housed here in San Antonio at JBSA, in a fabulous old hospital building on post that we're doing all the good work in. And then there's a transition phase, which also includes primarily our MCOM transition centers, but also transition centers in different places. And then obviously the VA benefits delivery phase at the end. So the VA is also in this process, really at the very beginning too, right? So all those pieces like come together, and that's right, your IDES. When you say IDES, it's really all of that, right? Yeah. Okay. So goals. What's the DoD goals? Because I know the DoD has some goals, and I really want you to give the story, Lem. Like go back to COVID. I think we were hurting, from maybe an efficiency standpoint during COVID, for a lot of different reasons. But we've really drove that timeliness of this process down from then, even though we still want to get better. Maybe talk through that a little bit, and then what are the basic goals of the process?
Sure, sir. And I think it's important to note here too that when you look at history in terms of where we were before there was an IDES, when a member was injured and they were going to be separated from their respective service branch, it took them upwards of 320 days to get through their military disability evaluation system. And then once they separated, it took another 200 days to receive VA benefits. And so all total, it was about 540 days in order to receive your DoD and VA benefits.
So that was kind of what, before 2006?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. All the way up until 2007, which is when we began to pilot what we know today as the IDES process.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so you had this, that's a long process,
Sure.
500 some odd days. I don't do math, but that's more than a year. That hurts.
And so at some point, once it was decided that we were going to, because it was congressional legislation that allowed us to be able, the DoD, all the services, to begin piloting a program such as what we have today, which is IDES. And so when we looked at it, we kind of did tabletop exercises to walk through that, okay, if the VA were to do the exams, how much time would it take? And so that's how we began to formulate and develop the goals. And then we looked at the transition piece and what was an integral part about transitioning to ensure that the service member could receive benefits. And so through time, when IDES was fully stood up in 2011, the first goals were established. If you were active duty, it took you 295 days to get through the process. That was the goal. 80% of the service members that go through the process were to complete it in 295 days. If you were a Army National Guard or a Army Reserve, Compo 2 or 3 soldier that's not on active duty, then your time was basically 305 days to complete the process. So in 2018, that process further was streamlined in terms of timeliness goals after further reassessments of where we stood in each of the phases, that the DoD made the decision that all the services, regardless of your component, your goal would be 230 days to complete the process. And it wasn't until 1 October of 2019 when the decision was made that officially we're going to scale it down even more just due to readiness and some other concerns from the DoD, that the process would now be 180 days for all service members. Again, 80% of the service members completing the process in 180 days. If you were to drill it down by the respective phases that you both were just talking about, to complete a medical evaluation board phase, the DoD's published goal is that you have to complete 80% of those members through that phase of the process within 72 days. The PEB phase, or physical evaluation board phase, the goal is 80% of those service members in 82 days. And then of course upon transition, the goal is 26 days to complete that, which excludes any determinations of leave or authorized administrative absences that the member may be authorized by their chain of command. And so all total, 80% of the 80% of the service members going through this process are to complete it in 180 days. And so some people tend to think, okay, well, what about the VA? Why are they not a part of this process? Well, from a standpoint of the DoD, the concern is being able to ensure that they've gotten their evaluation through the MEB and the PEB and ensuring that they're separating, because the seamless delivery of benefits between DoD and the VA is something that's not of concern, but we still measure that just to look at how efficient the VA is doing their work. So 80% of the service members completing the process, again, 180 days.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way, long journey.
Well, I'm certainly a big metrics guy. I like to know, hey, what's everybody doing? How does it look? Are we meeting the goals? 180 days is the goal. I know we're not meeting that goal for everybody right now, but part of the process is going after, hey, okay, so where are the barriers to efficiency, right? To get through in each of those phases that would get us to the goal. So maybe just talk about some of those barriers that are maybe giving us a little bit of work to do or whatever, focus to get towards.
Yes, sir. I think probably one of the biggest, that's really kind of opened the eyes to a lot of folks is that when we look at the first phase of this process, which is the medical evaluation board phase, and that goal again is 80% in 72 days. The biggest proponent of that, which has a very integral part in this, is the VA when it comes to those medical examinations. And so I think it's just important to note that the same medical examination that the VA is doing for soldiers going through the IDES process is the same examination that's being done for any veteran who's seeking service connection from the VA. VA made a conscious decision in 2021 to decide and go with all contract support to execute any and all of their pre-delivery discharge programs. Whether you were benefits delivery at discharge, which is one of those, or the IDES, which accounts for about maybe 1% of the whole pre-delivery discharge, and then all the other service member claims. But I think one of the big impacts to that timeliness right now in medical examinations is because of the legislation from the PACT Act, which deals with the burn pit exposures and the health care entitled to those individuals who may have had that exposure and are claiming service connection for various conditions resulting from that, from the Gulf War, from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So that impacts a lot of that workload on them. The VA has brought on new contract support to get after some of those challenges, but again, they're faced with some of the same challenges that the medical treatment facilities are facing when it comes to physicians. There's a shortage of physicians across the board, and particularly on behavioral health. Mm-hmm. Big impact, and when you look at medical exams for the Army right now, as of the end of March, we had about 3,600 soldiers that are sitting in that particular stage waiting for their exams. So the turnaround is impacting that too.
Yeah, but this keys in on one of our, as we plug in with OSD and talk the overall program, these are the things that we're sharing from a DoD perspective, also with the VA, right?
Absolutely, sir. We have multiple forms, and as we've discussed this morning, there's forms that we do address that with. And we'll be meeting with the VA again here in April and kind of discussing more of those challenges and some of their leadership from the DC regional or headquarters there at the VA Central Office to kind of go over some of these challenges and just kind of look at where they are in terms of where they were benchmarking some of the areas in the medical examination and quality assurance issues that they were having with some of the exams to where they currently are now, since they've onboarded more capability
Yeah.
to execute the exams.
Yeah. And we're going to continue to push from the top perspective. But maybe we flip it. Hey, what can commanders do on the ground? Because there's a couple of TTPs
Very
here.
good, very good questions.
There's a couple of TTPs here that commanders can help. Like, the thing that comes to my mind, and you can expand upon it. Hey, if you have that appointment, man, don't miss it.
Absolutely.
Because if you miss it, there's this line generally, waiting to see a physician tied to this process. So, that's one thing, but, you talk a little bit about.
No, sir, and you make a very good point. That's probably one of the most critical, but I would say probably number two to that is that really, developing and understanding expectations. And I think it starts from the very beginning of the process when a member is told that, hey, you have a medical profile that now is requiring us to refer you to a medical evaluation board or to the IDES process. Commanders have to have understanding of the process, and one of the ways to do that is that participate in what is called a multidisciplinary briefing. So when a member within 10 days of their being referred to the process, the multidisciplinary briefing objective is to make sure that they're level setting all the expectations about what the member can expect once they get referred to this process, to include options for appeal, the whole VA, vocational rehabilitation, representation by legal counsel, and then anticipated time it would potentially take to navigate through the process. So having that understanding from commanders, knowing what their soldiers are going to be going through, I think is very important, because there's a lot of commanders that don't necessarily have that situational awareness.
Yeah, and I know we've put together a couple of products for TTPs, right? And we've pushed it out. I know quarterly I generally give most 1 through 3 stars on the active side, a little bit of feedback on IDES, a couple other areas too. We talk casualty and LOD management, and then transition assistance program stats. So that's one place that a commander can see this. I'm assuming we got it hung somewhere that they can grab.
Yes, sir, it is. And as a matter of fact, in most of the installations now, the installation, the lead office there for the MEB, the lead PEBLO, or Physical Evaluation Board Liaison Officer, will provide that briefing to garrison commanders, provides it to major commands or divisions and brigades when they're having those briefs. So, but it is available for public access, and kind of segue into kind of one of your initiatives is the development of our mobile app for the IDES, or just the DES as a whole. Yeah. That multidisciplinary briefing is one of the products that we intend to place out there and make available to commanders, soldiers, and their families. Yeah,
you go back to, I remember like 2010 time frame, there was the handbook, right? The printed handbook, the app is really meant to replace that, where you can easily get information and TTPs and all of the above, right?
Right, and we still provide those handbooks as well.
Yeah, I know the handbook.
The app is
for
the way
us
to
less
go.
tech-savvy people, sir.
Yeah, that's right. Different generations consume differently. Yes, indeed. Name a couple of the other barriers as you go through the process. Don, maybe you can.
Yes, sir. And to piggyback on what Mr. Chance was saying, so that the commanders and the units understand why sometimes their soldiers are in the process for longer than maybe anticipated or than they expect. And that's when Mr. Chance was talking about managing the expectations of everybody within this process, not just the soldiers, but the units as well. Because we understand, we get it, that this is all readiness. That's the driving force of all of this. But one of the other barriers that we face is we have a significant formal physical evaluation board, which are called the FPEBs. We have a major backlog right now, which we're trying to work through, and the PEB is getting after initiatives to address that backlog through a couple of things, which I'll talk about. But one of the biggest issues are that people that don't, like from the outside looking in, don't understand that to have an FPEB board, an appeal board, or actually I should say the FPEB, the formal board itself, requires not just the soldier, but they have to have legal representation. Right. And right now we are limited by what the Office of Soldiers Council can provide, which is, if they are limited to 4 FPEBs a week per attorney, then we can only do, like right now, let's say 60 formal boards a week. That limits us, especially with a backlog of 1,000 cases. Sure. And people wonder, well, why aren't you getting ahead? And because the part of that everybody doesn't see is as we're trying to get after the 1,000 we have on the list, we have more coming in every day that are appealing and wanting to have a formal board.
Yeah.
So it's a constant.
Yeah, sure. Our limiting factors is some specialty, right? Some docs as well. One of the I think the coolest things we've done to up the docs in our organization, right, is we've actually brought some retiree recalls on. And so that's been very effective for us to increase the amount of doctors that are associated with this process while not limiting access in another area of DoD, right? OTSG as well. We're not really asking them to provide more. So I think we've done that pretty well. And we are working with OSC too on that concept of some retiree recall on the lawyer side, because it's the same thing. There's needs everywhere in DoD and in the Army for those lawyers. But in this case, we want to make sure that, hey, we're doing soldiers right in this process. And one of those key things is they have representation as they go through the process, and then specifically on the formal board process. So, of course, I don't give you any sleep, right? I'm like, hey, how do we, we're really working hard to figure out how do we do, more and get creative, and more efficient here. I think one of the big things for me too is just to continue to be transparent with soldiers that are going through the process. Hey, this is what's happening. This is why it's taking this amount of time, et cetera. But overarchingly, I think the team has done some really heavy lifting. You go back several years, and the processing seemed to be over 365 days.
400.
Yeah, and we've pulled that down over 100 days, even though we want to be as good as we can. Any other barriers that you want to talk about?
I think again, sort of, one of your messaging themes has been, communication and educating the force, not just the soldier, but the chain of command, but also the family too, at every opportunity. And so what I love, I think is unique with the agency for us is the fact that when we did consolidate all of our functions here to Joint Base San Antonio, is that we were able to say, okay, consistently now when it comes to our adjudication of these soldiers for fitness, we've got one PEB we deal with. We have the better ability now to engage and communicate a lot more frequently because we're not dealing with 3 different PEBs located throughout the United States. It's one. So there's one message coming out of the agency. And then, of course, on the headquarters side, one of our initiatives that, we shared with you before was that now that we know that when it comes to the transition to separation piece, a lot of times there's been the disconnect when the service member is not aware that they're supposed to separate because they've been approved for their IDES findings. We're communicating directly with the soldiers ourselves. We're calling them and talking to them to let them know that your final findings have been approved after all of your appeals have been exhausted. And so, you have a projected separation window of a 90-day time frame. So if they need more time, we explain the process to them. If they have excess leave and they need to extend the date, there's a process that they follow, but we walk them through that and we don't leave them alone. We always tell them that if you have questions afterwards, we have 2 1-800 numbers. We have multiple group mailboxes, but then obviously with social media has been really helpful because we've been communicating with soldiers on social media regularly now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it definitely helps.
Yeah, definitely push let's be as transparent, as we can here, and then interact as frequent as we can to keep folks informed. Most people don't come into the Army thinking they're going to go through the IDES process, right? So it's trying to have a little bit of empathy and doing this, the right way as folks go through the process is pretty important.
And the one challenge too to that in terms of the communication is that when it comes to that medical examination piece when they're in the MEB phase, it is technically not a requirement for the soldiers to communicate with the chain of command on the appointments. However, the soldier has to communicate with the commanders and those first sergeants and sergeants major and battalion commanders at various points of this so they kind of know where they are timeline so they can begin planning for transition. Because no soldier has to be here. I mean, they've been injured or they're ill. And so it's important to make sure they're getting the due process that they need here, and communicating on exams is very important because commanders have to be able to counsel the soldier and communicate with them on an estimated transition window.
Yeah. I mean, you two know I'm big on, hey, own what you can, and
Right.
shape your own destiny. Where you can. That's one of those things that we can get a little bit of help from everybody, is just understanding the appointments and getting soldiers to the appointments. Our part is, okay, hey Don, get these formals. Cooking as best we can. I think we're certainly in a much better spot than we were during the COVID scenario and where we came out of the COVID. So I think we're in a pretty decent spot overall. However, right, there's these areas that we've talked about where we're going to continue to push to get better and to get a little more efficiency. Hey, so what's next? What's next in the PDA sphere? What's going on?
Dawn, you want to talk about some policy stuff, and then we can kind of talk about other measures internally?
Everybody loves policy. Well, a key initiative that just recently happened, which we're all excited about, and I know the Army in general is excited about it, but the Secretary of the Army just recently on February 9th, 2024, published the Army Directive 2024-01, which directly impacts Army fitness determinations and deployability. So what that means for the PEB is that it has given the PEB the ability to be much more flexible when determining fitness for soldiers across the board. And that flexibility is related to the soldiers, depending on what their specialized skill sets are and, time in service, whether their conditions are medically controlled, and whether the command supports retaining that soldier. And then also the ability for that soldier to deploy with a medical waiver, because previously, we were tied to if a soldier was non-deployable, they were unfit. So now that we have this new Army directive, we are able to directly impact readiness. And as of today, we have 28 soldiers that have been found fit since February 9th. And I know why a lot of people say, 28 is not a big number, but to us it's huge, because that is now 28 soldiers that we were able to return to duty in the last 2 months that are now back in fight, that would have been separated because of most likely being non-deployable.
Yeah, it's 28 more. Every soldier counts, in my opinion, that we can keep in the ranks, and that want to stay in the ranks. Because I know some are okay with transitioning based on whatever personal scenario they have. But yeah, I think that's terribly exciting. The more soldiers we can keep in. There's definitely a lot of jobs in the Army we can fill with these soldiers.
We're doing that now, sir. I mean, when you look at just not only with that directive, but the current exception to policy that exists right now, which is the continuation on active duty and continuation on active reserve, which applies to Guard and Reserve, not on active duty. Just because they were found unfit in their respective MOS or their area of concentration, if they were an officer, like you said, there's needs in the Army elsewhere for them, and PDA is a living example of that right now. We've just alone in PDA, we've got 5 co-ed soldiers that work in the agency right now who were found unfit in their MOSs, but they're performing a very valuable service to the Army in helping these soldiers transition. And what better way to tell the story than those soldiers who actually went through this process and can be the walking testimony to tell them what they can expect.
Yeah, and hey, there's a lot of TDA jobs in the Army. So I know we're looking at some of this in very particular means, through MOS lenses. But I think that's why that COAID, and I always say that acronym wrong. Why that process exists, to allow folks to kind of chew on that and then retain folks for their jobs. Okay, we're about time though, so I do want to pass it over to you for any parting shots. This has been, I think, a really good laydown of, hey, this is our organization, this is IDES, and kind of how it's working.
I think the one takeaway again, sir, as you kind of mentioned about communication, and we just implore those that have questions for us, if they're needing assistance with any area of the process they're not really sure about, to please reach out to us. We're definitely ready to do that and engage at whatever level we can. We talk to brigade commanders. We've talked to a couple of division commanders. I know yourself you have as well on a couple of areas. But I think overall, when you look at the process, I think kind of at the very beginning of the discussion, we've come a long way. Can we get better? Absolutely. There are areas to improve, which is why one of those other initiatives is that we're reassessing all of the performance metrics right now where we are very successful versus where we're not so successful, and kind of reallocating and looking at that time. So all systems, all processes are designed to work. but it is a requirement to constantly reevaluate it. And
Yeah.
that's what we're doing right
Yeah. Well, and I don't like to rest too much, right? So it's always,
Complacency.
just leaning in
Leaning
to,
in, right.
to tweak and get, whatever we can get better, better. Because at the end of the day, for me, right, it's about that soldier. It's about how do we take care of people and, soldiers and their families, and then ultimately veterans, because that's what they all end up being. Don.
I think, sir, for me, the major takeaway is that in this process, we recognize, I think that sometimes soldiers that are in the process may not think it, but we see them as every single case is unique, and they are not just a case, they're a person. We realize that this process that they are going through, we realize that it affects them and their families for the rest of their lives. So we don't take that lightly. And there are days when, we go home when cases affect us. And I'll just tell you, I had a formal recently where the soldier actually said, I don't want to have to get out, but I can tell you that at every level, I felt respected in this process. And to me, that's all I want to hear, that if a soldier, if they don't get exactly what they want in this process, hopefully they do, but if they don't, that they have felt respected through the process, because we realize it's very stressful because it is their life.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And obviously, I think the team is pretty focused on that aspect as well, right? The empathetic, assistance of soldiers as they go through this, or flip it to even to commanders, helping commanders understand, and then also manage on their side. That's I don't know, a hallmark of the team, which I really respect. And it's good to be the tag. It's good to be the CG of PDA because of the fine folks that are working in these teams, on these teams. Hey, thanks for jumping in. Those that are listening, we're obviously pushing social media a little bit, so you can track us or follow us at the Adjutant General. But the PDA also has a LinkedIn page now, a newer LinkedIn page. Thank you for creating that team. And if you want to throw some questions their way, that's one avenue. Just look up the Physical Disability Agency and you'll find it on LinkedIn. We're here to assist and engage as needed. But thanks for joining us on this Tag Talks, and folks that are out there, appreciate you much. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Soldiers first.
Soldiers first. Thank you, sir.